Today, Rafael Fiziev versus Mateusz Gamrot. Who will win? Who will lose? Who moves forward and who stays behind? And Michelle Watterson Gomez. Is she still the karate hottie or just the hottie? Find out all of this and more on today's episode of Matter of Fact MMA. Let's go. What's happening, guys? We getting into it. We're going to get into the UFC fight card going down this weekend. We're in the main event. Rafael Fiziev will step in there against Mateusz Gamrot. So let's go ahead. We're going to start out with that fight first. And I don't know why I paused multiple times in saying that. Let's go. So, Rafael Fiziev, coming off a loss to Justin Gaethje, in which he was doing extremely well against Justin Gaethje, but at some point during that fight, due to, I believe it was a punch, it wasn't an eye poke, but some sort of a punch to Rafael Fiziev's face, he received an eye injury, and his eye started to swell up, and it looked bad. Nevertheless, Justin Gaethje won that contest. Now, so he's coming off a loss, while we have Mateusz Gamrot coming off a win over Jalen Turner. This, to me, is going to be a very interesting fight because it's kind of like the age-old, it's kind of like the age-old mixed martial arts battle between a stand-up, striking-based fighter versus more of a wrestling, grappling, heavy fighter. And honestly, in this one, this might be shocking to some folks. I don't know. I believe that Rafael Fiziev is a slight favorite in this. I believe I'm going to go with Mateusz Gamrot in this one. I feel like Jalen Turner is an extremely good striker, right? And if you take out his last fight against Dan Hooker, in my opinion, Jalen Turner's a really good striker, and I'm not saying he's as good as Fiziev, but I felt like that if a good striker was going to catch Mateusz Gamrot, it would have happened in that fight. And even though towards the end of that fight, Mateusz started to slow down slightly, he was still able to edge out the win. Now, I know that some people might have still gave that fight to Jalen Turner, but at the same time, I just believe that Mateusz is going to be able... I believe that early on in the first and probably the second round, I believe that Fiziev is going to piece up Mateusz slightly on the feet. But I believe that once Mateusz gauges his timing and his distance, he's going to be able to take Fiziev down, and that's going to be the story of the fight from that point on. I don't think he's going to finish Rafael Fiziev, but I feel like that Mateusz Gamrot will be able to control him for the majority of the 5 rounds and go ahead and ink out a decision. After that, I'm not sure where Mateusz goes, and even if Fiziev wins, I'm not sure where he goes either, because, the lightweight division is kind of, it's kind of in flux right now with, we don't know if Connor's coming back. We don't know what Michael Chandler's going to do. We got Charlie Olives stepping in there in October against Islam Makhachev. So we're going to see what goes on there. I mean, there's a lot of room, so to speak, in the lightweight division. And I'm not really too sure where either one of these guys go with the win. But nevertheless, I'm going to lean toward Mateusz Gamrot. Let's move on. Next fight, co-main event. Bryce Mitchell steps in there against Dan Ige. Bryce is coming off a loss to Topuria, which, I mean, who ain't coming off a loss to Topuria? Oh. And as well as Dan Ige is coming off a win against Nate the Train, baby. So let's get into it. I'm going to go against the masses on this one as well. I'm going to pick Dan Ige. Now, more than likely, the way this fight is going to play out is Bryce Mitchell is going to keep taking Dan Ige down and smothering him. Dan Ige is, fairly good in scrambles. He's got pretty good takedown defense for the most part. He's pretty good when he's backed up against the cage wall, which are all things that Bryce Mitchell does. But I feel like Bryce, on one side of the spectrum, I feel like Bryce just takes him down and smothers him for 3 rounds and inks out the decision. However, and I think that a lot of people sleep on Dan Ige, and I think that he's training harder. He's training better. He seemed to have a much better fight IQ in his last fight against Nate the Train. And I don't mean against Nate the Train, but his fight IQ overall, if you've been watching him his whole career, seemed to be a lot better. So in my opinion, I kind of feel like I'm going to choose Dan Ige in this one. I'm not really too sure how he's going to get it done, but it's just a vibe. And sometimes, you know what I'm saying? You got to pick off the vibes. You know what I'm talking about? But for real, I just, I don't know what it is, but I have a feeling that Dan Ige is going to be able to go out there and get this one done. Let's move on. Next fight, we got Marina Rodriguez versus Michelle Waterson Gomez. This is their second fight. The first time these two fought was back in 2021, and Marina Rodriguez took the win in that one. In my opinion, I'm gonna have to go along with Rodriguez. She's fresh off of, she won her last fight. She's back in the winning column. Michelle Waterson has lost her last 4 fights. And then the fight before that, she kind of stole a decision from Angela Hill. You know what I'm saying? I mean, she kind of hamburgled a decision there. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, she was like a thief in the night, just came in and stole that decision. In my opinion, I think Michelle Waterson is from the old guard of female fighters, in the sense that she has really good striking, really good stand-up. She had decent scrambles. She's got decent takedown defense, But for the most part, these new women that are coming out, or these newer fighters. Not saying that Marina is a newer fighter, because she's not. She's a vet as well. But I feel like when you're talking about Michelle Waterson, it's just the new crop of female fighters. They have it all. That are well-rounded on the feet, well-rounded on the ground, good grappling, good cage grapples, good takedowns, good takedown defense, submissions. I mean, they got it all, what I'm talking about? And so, in my opinion, I just think Michelle Waterson Gomez continues to get rolled over by a lot of the younger or newer fighters. Now, with that being said, Marina is a vet of the sport, but I feel like she's got the length on Michelle Waterson. She's already beaten Michelle Waterson before. And I just get this vibe that Michelle Waterson is a fighter that was definitely had the spotlight on her. The UFC was pushing her. They wanted her to be the first mom champ. They were leaning into her looks. You know what I'm saying? So they really wanted to put her out there, really get her going. And I just feel like that Michelle Waterson is hanging, she's clinging, you know what I'm saying? She's clinging on, she's hanging on to hope that she's going to be able to make a run. And it's kind of rough when you see a lot of fighters like that more towards the end of their career or the latter part of their career, because they're just clinging, you know what I'm saying? They just hanging on, there's a tightrope, they done slipped, fell off of it, and they got like one pinky finger hanging on it, and they're just hanging on, hoping or praying or thinking that they can string together a few wins and get back to a title shot. But in this division, I just don't see it happening for Michelle Waterson at all. And I feel like, any fight now, you could see Michelle Waterson take off the gloves in the octagon and retire. It could be this fight. So, I got to go along with Rodriguez in this one. That's just what that is. Let's move on. Next, we got Brian Battle against AJ Fletcher. Brian Battle has one of the cooler MMA fight names. If you're an MMA fighter, you want your last name to be Battle. Nevertheless, Brian Battle, fresh off of extremely quick, extremely good knockout over Gabe Green. And I got to go along with Brian Battle, former Ultimate Fighter, he's a very talented guy. He's tall, he's long, he's rangy for the division. He's got power, and he fights with a savage like intensity about him. He's just an intense guy when he steps in the octagon. So I got to go along with Brian Battle over AJ Fletcher. Let's move on. We got Ricardo Ramos stepping in there against Charles Air Jordan. I got to go along with Air Jordan. You know, I feel like he was already very comparable on the striking, on the stand-up. I feel like his striking was already really good. He's got flair. He's got a little swag about him, you know what I'm saying? He's got a cool nickname. But also, I feel like his stand-up was extremely well, but what we saw in his last fight, when he went in there with the submission specialist, he held his own. You know, there were times that fight went to the ground, he stayed poised, and he just made sure he didn't make any mistakes in which it would get him submitted. You know, especially against a Chrome Gracie. So, I mean, I feel like he leveled up. I feel like his takedown defense, his wrestling defense, and his submission defense, I feel like he leveled up in his last fight. And he had to when you're going in there against a Gracie. And so I feel like overall he might be the more well-rounded fighter over Ricardo Ramos. Now, Ricardo Ramos is a wild man. He goes in there, he throws caution to the wind, and he throws him hands. You know, he goes in there playground fight style, arms drawn out like, what's up now? And, I mean, that dude hammers it. He goes in. So he's kind of like a kill or be killed kind of fighter to a certain extent. So it's very possible he could go in there early in round one and catch Charles Jordan, and get him out of there. But in my opinion, I think Charles Jordan's going to be able to keep him at range with the striking, keep him at range with his jab, throw in some leg kicks, throw in these devastating body kicks that he has that he kept hitting Chrome Gracie with. And if it does go to the ground, which I don't really see it, I think he can hold his own. So I'm going to go with Charles Air Jordan. Let's move on. Dan Argueta versus Miles John. Come on, bro. I got Dan in this one. No disrespect to Miles John if you ever see this video, but that guy, he just don't have it. I'm not trying to disrespect the man, but a lot of the times in fights that he might be doing well in the first round, and you know, and sometimes early in the second, if it goes to the second, there's just something about him. It's almost like he has a self-sabotage mentality that when he is doing well and he is ahead, he always makes a mistake. And all of his opponents tend to capitalize on that mistake. And once that mistake is made, Miles John never seems to be able to get back in his groove and take over the fight again. So, I mean, with that said, I got to go along with Dan to take this one. Ain't too much more to say about that, you know, but I got to go along with Dan in this one. How about Dirty Bird, Tim Means stepping in there against Andre Fajalho? Bro, this is a tough one because I've always been a big fan of the Dirty Bird, Tim Means. I want to choose him, but, you know, he's much later in his career. He's not a fighter like Michelle Watterson to me, who's just hanging on by a thread, and that's why he keeps coming back and fighting. I believe he's just an old school scrapper. He's just an old school guy that loves to go out there, loves to fight. Kind of reminds me, if y'all been watching the sport long enough, you know what I'm talking about. Kind of reminds me of old school Mike Powell. You know what I'm saying? The master of the mullet, Mike Powell. It's just, the vibe that I get from Tim Means is he's just going to keep going out there and fighting. And I mean, yeah, he might retire at any time, but I just have a vibe that he's not worried about making a run in his career. He's not hanging on by a thread, hoping he can one day get a title shot. He just enjoys going out there and scrapping, throwing hands, having a good competition, challenging himself. And if he loses, he loses. He goes right back to the gym, regroups, and he's ready for another fight. With that being said, exactly what I explained, you know, I don't think that it bothers him a lot to take a loss anymore because he just loves a good scrap, wants to stay active, wants to continue to compete, at this stage of his life. So I'm going to go along with Andre to take this fight. Let's move on again. We have Mohamed Usman, stepping in there against Jake Collier. You know, this is what I'll say about Mo Usman. Mo Usman isn't the most technical. He's got very, very sloppy stand-up. And even his wrestling, you know, and his takedowns are very sloppy. But what Mo Usman has is he just has that touch of death type power. Like, if he touches you with a shot, you're liable to go out, or you're at least going to get wobbled, you know. And outside of that, I mean, even though a lot of his takedown entries are very sloppy, if he grabs a hold of you, the guy is so massive, he's so powerful, you know, you're going down to the ground. And a lot of the times, once he gets you down to the ground, you don't want this guy to get in any sort of a mount, you know, top control or side control, because this guy, you know, I mean, he's hitting with power, and he's just a big guy. Like, I just feel like he's got like two 50-pound dumbbells for fists. And when he comes down, there's so much force, it's just caving your whole head in. Like, you're just like, oh, no. You know what I'm talking about? So, in my opinion, I got to go along with Mo Usman. Plus, I mean, it can't hurt to have, you know, former welterweight champion be your brother, Kamaru Usman, you know, and to be training with him as well. So, and especially got to keep in mind that Kamaru Usman has taken a lot of time off. And, you know, that you also have to wonder if he's really, really been helping train his brother in all this time, because he hasn't been training for a fight himself. So I'm going to go along with Mo Usman over Jake Collier in this one. So, nevertheless, that is your breakdown for the upcoming UFC card later on this weekend, Saturday night. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be going down. I definitely appreciate all of you all for checking out another one of my videos. Please, guys, like, subscribe, comment. I want to try to, you know, drive the engagement up on this, so that way we can, you know, get a little bit of money flowing in on the channel, and we can upgrade to better things. We get better equipment, better programs. I can be on here doing my Luke Thomas thing and breaking down fights, because y'all don't really know. Your boy can break down some fights. I can put on my sportscaster voice and break down some fights. But nevertheless, maybe you can break down some old school fights. But nevertheless, I appreciate you guys for joining me for another episode of Matter of Fact MMA. And I'll check you next time. Peace.